I believe, as a consequence of the neoliberal policies that Ronald Reagan put into place in 1981, and that were continued not just by Reagan, but also by Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and that are being now challenged by Joe Biden. But nonetheless, we've had 42 years of basically neoliberal policies that reduce the income of working people, reduce the ability of people to form unions. In fact, we went from basically a third of America being unionized to, less than 10% of America being unionized during that period of time. 2/3 of Americans having the equivalent of a good union job, because union jobs set the local wage floor, down to 45% of Americans being in the middle class now. It was over 60% when Reagan came into office. It's now 43%, according to official numbers. And what's happened as a result of this, in addition to the bottom, not just the bottom half, the bottom 80% of America losing its footing, losing its bearing, losing its ability to buy a new house and to take a vacation every year and to buy a new car from time to time. The kind of signals of middle class life. One of the responses to this, actually, let me finish this thought before I get to the response. There are a number of factors that are driving this. One, as I mentioned, is neoliberalism, the destruction of unions, the moving offshore of over 15,000 factories and 17 million good union jobs that are now in China and Malaysia and Mexico. The destruction of the labor union movement, the consolidation of American business. In 1983, Ronald Reagan notified the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission that they should stop enforcing the three antitrust laws that we have on the books: the Sherman Act of 1890, the Clayton Act of 1929, I think it is, or maybe it's 1918. And the Antitrust Act of 1956. Stop enforcing those. And his administration did. It stopped enforcing them. And the result of that is that it's very difficult for young people starting out now to do what Louise and I did with our lives. I mean, starting when I was 21 years old, I started my first business. And, we've started and built up and sold off 6 or 7 businesses in the 51 years we've been married. And, our philosophy was we were going to take our retirement in pieces throughout our life. And we've done that. We build a business, sell it off, live off that money for a year or 2 or 3, run out of money, start a new business, build it up for a year or 2, sell it off. I mean, this is literally what we've done all these years. You can't do that anymore. I mean, you can, but it's awful, awful hard now. The small businesses that used to be the backbone of America are largely gone. Family-owned businesses, the local dry cleaner shop or the local restaurant or the local hotel or the local bank or the local furniture store or the local electronics store that you would, start in your town and then hand down to your kids and grandkids and was typically named after somebody, Woolworths or whatever. Those are gone, by and large. And along with them, and along with good wages, today in 2023, in order to maintain what was a middle-class lifestyle the year that Ronald Reagan came into office, 1981, requires 2 incomes. In 1981, you could do it with 1 income. In 1957, my dad, I remember I was 6 years old. My dad got a job in a tool and die shop that was unionized. And prior to that, he had been selling World Book encyclopedias and Rexair vacuum cleaners door to door, and we were poor. It was me, my brother Steve, my brother Stan was born during this time, so it was 3 kids and mom and dad living in a 1-bedroom house. It was a 2-room house. There was 1 room that was the living room, kitchen, dining room, and 1 room that was the bedroom. And it was just a little teeny tiny house on Cleveland Street in Lansing, Michigan. And, because Dad wasn't making that much money selling vacuum cleaners and World Book encyclopedias door to door. But when he got that union job, that was his entree into the middle class. And by the time he died, he had bought his house. He bought a new house. He took a vacation every year. He bought a new car every 2 or 3 years. He was able to put his kids through school to the extent that any of us took him up on that. I mean, you know, that was the middle class with one single paycheck. From the 1950s all the way, and when he died, and when he retired, he had a pension that along with Social Security gave him a really nice lifestyle. Well, today, if you want to have that same lifestyle that my dad had or that Louise and I had as we were going through the years of our marriage, today you have to have 2 jobs to do that, and in some cases even 3 jobs. You know, one person working 2 jobs, one person working 1 full-time job, to just maintain that same standard of living. So the result of this is that, you know, average Americans are extraordinarily stressed out. And the percentage of us who are living in poverty has gone from being, you know, in the neighborhood of around 30% of us, back when 66% of us were in the middle class. Then you got, you know, in addition, you got the top 2 or 3%. It has gone from around 30% of us to around 50 or 60% of us, because now only 43% of us are in the middle class. So we've got all these additional people living in deep poverty, and as rents are going up and as food prices are going up, and yeah, you know, inflation and everything else, but also, you know, with the rents, it's the commodification of single-family housing. Now you've got, you know, these giant hedge funds that are buying, you know, half of all houses in America last year were sold for cash, and the majority of those that were sold for cash were sold to institutional investors or foreign countries. I realize there are some boomers who have accumulated enough money that they can buy houses for cash, but they're in the minority. So the question has become, what do we do about this? We can't just instantly create enough jobs. And, you know, I had a caller in the last hour said, you know, well, if we revive, you know, Biden is building we're building factories now in America at a faster rate than we literally ever have, well, than we have since the 1950s, ever have in most people's lifetimes. But those factories are going to be heavily automated. There's going to be a lot of robots. Supermarkets, you know, the checkouts are all automated. I had a trucker call in last Friday who was talking about how his trucking company is looking at having the lead truck have a driver, and then behind that is 2 trucks that are on automatic pilot. They just follow the truck ahead of them wherever it goes. And, you know, 3 times as many trucks and 1/3 as many drivers. What's going to happen? So increasingly, the solution to this that is being offered is something called Universal Basic Income, UBI. And this is being experimented with in countries all over the world, but it's also being experimented here in the United States in more than 100 communities. And one of them is the subject of a great piece by Timothy Pratt in The Guardian, theguardian.com. It takes place in Georgia. And it's being run by, now there are similar projects in Rochester, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, in Philadelphia, but this one's in Georgia. And it's Stockton, California, by the way, did the same thing. In fact, the mayor, Michael Tubbs, it was such a success that he went on to found Mayors for a Guaranteed Basic Income. So the way basic income works is everybody who has an income below a certain level, and in this case, in the Georgia example, it was income below $29,000 a year, which is 200% of the poverty level. Everyone who has an income below that level, who qualifies, you know, who gets into the program, they capped it at 650 women, and this was a group that specifically wanted to do it for black women. So this was 650 black women who were poor. That each one of them got, I believe it was $850 a month. Yeah, $850 a month for 2 years, no strings attached. You can do anything you want with the money. Now, Republicans will tell you if you give black women free money, they're going to go spend it on drugs, right? I mean, I've been hearing this from Republicans my whole entire life. This goes back to Ronald Reagan talking about the welfare queen, or black people in general. But in fact, you know, that's just racist BS. So they're 1 year into the project right now, and this is what they found. Slightly more than half the women have now saved some money. None had any money saved at the outset of the project. 3 times as many women have been able to afford childcare. The share of women whose cell phone service was interrupted due to unpaid bills dropped from 60% to 40%. In other words, these women are doing well. This is being run by the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, the GRO Fund, and Give Directly, which is a national group that gives money to guaranteed income projects in the United States. And I think that this is, basically this is what Social Security is, right? You pass a certain age and guess what? You've got a guaranteed basic income. I would call it, in fact, instead of calling it guaranteed basic income, I'd call it Social Security for everybody, or for everybody who makes less than a certain amount. That if you live in America, and it's predicated on this argument that Teddy Roosevelt made in 1912 when he was running for president again on the Bull Moose Party ticket and talking about the square deal. And that was that in the richest country on earth, nobody should live in poverty. Not everybody can work. Not everybody's even willing to work. But having people live in poverty hurts our country. It hurts all the rest of us. So you come up with a fairly minimal amount of money, and you give that, and by the way, we just had a big test of this just in the last 3 years with the child tax credit, where everybody in America who had kids all of a sudden was getting $600 a month free money. It was a guaranteed basic income. And what happened? The poverty level in America dropped by 20%. Now it's going back up.